Good Thursday afternoon to everybody, or evening, or maybe Friday morning if you're with us in Australia. If you are, good Friday morning. How is it so far? My name's Darren Pope. I'm a developer advocate for CloudBees. And yesterday, on Wednesday, April, what was yesterday? Today, we'll call it the 7th because I don't remember now. The new version of Jenkins LTS 2.277.2 was released. And today we're going to talk about some of the new features and really a lot of the fixes that came along in that release. Joining me today, I have, just like normal, Mark Waite. Mark, how are you doing today?
Just great, Darren.
Good to see you again. You're in Colorado. Are you still under 15 inches of snow?
No, springtime has sprung. It's beautiful, warm weather. I've been taking walks without a coat. It's really lovely.
That's the weird thing about Colorado, man. One day it's 18 inches of snow, the next day you're in the swimming pool.
Absolutely. And it is
Almost.
40-degree swings Fahrenheit, not uncommon.
And I can tell you're used to talking in an international audience because you just called out Fahrenheit. What would 40 Celsius be? That would be insanely warm.
It is. 40 Celsius is very uncomfortable for human beings. That's really uncomfortable.
But that's not why we're here today. We're here to talk about what's new in 2.277.2. But
Right.
before we do that, for people that haven't been here with us before, I've introduced myself as part of CloudBees. You also work for CloudBees, but you also play a dual role. What is your role within the Jenkins community?
Sure. So in the Jenkins community, I'm the documentation officer. My job is to assure that documentation for Jenkins gets created, maintained, cared for, updated. In addition, I'm also an active part of the advocacy and outreach special interest group. And I've been acting as a mentor recently for Google Summer of Code and most recently for She Code Africa Contributhon.
Let's
So we've
talk
got
about that
lots
some
of
today, too.
opportunities.
Let's
Yeah,
talk about
let's
that
do.
because today, from a Jenkins perspective, is a little bit lighter than normal because, man, 277.1 that was big. This is still. We'll talk about some of the twist here, and right now, what is new? That's what we're going to get into right now. But before we get into the new, I keep teasing you along. One thing we always talk about, and in case you've never been here with us before, a lot of people don't understand what the concept of Jenkins LTS is. So, Mark, why don't you just take us through the normal thing? If nobody's been here with us before, talk about the Jenkins release cycle. Obviously, there is a weekly, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It comes out every Tuesday.
It does. So there's a Jenkins Weekly. Weekly will get you the latest, most cutting edge features on Jenkins. They are absolutely fresh. They are intended to be production ready, but they are the freshest thing. Every 12 weeks, so roughly 4 times a year, we adopt a new Jenkins long-term support baseline. That long-term support baseline will then be used for 3 months of releases, for 12 weeks of releases, that give users a relatively stable base that they can use and that others, like plugin developers, use as their basis for feature development. So 2.277.1, released a month ago, was released 12 weeks after or 14 weeks after its predecessor. Then 4 weeks later, we do 2.277.2. 4 weeks after that, we'll do 2.277.3. Occasionally, we may do a .4 and even sometimes a .5, depending on circumstances. But that 12-week cadence helps us deliver good code and deliver code that's a little more stable, a little more less prone to change than the weeklies are.
And that's okay for weeklies to be a little more, it's not bleeding edge, but
No.
it's definitely not bleeding edge, but it's weekly.
Right.
And
Well, it's if you're looking for the most recent feature, weekly's the place to find it. If you're looking for something that changes less frequently, LTS is the place to find that.
yep. Okay, so let's get into the change log for, there it is, okay. So here's the change log for 277.2. I'm going to leave off the leading 2 dot for the moment. I'll leave that there. You can read into that anything that you want, but we're going to leave off the leading 2 dot for the moment. Security fixes, number 1 bullet.
Right. So the Jenkins security team does an excellent job of assuring that Jenkins core is safe, secure, and stable. And so in this case, what they had found was that there were some gaps in validation of data. And the data validation gaps would allow an attacker to misuse or abuse the system. So they reported these as two CVEs, Common Vulnerability Database entries. The one is related to the REST API, and the other one is related to the names of views inside Jenkins. In both cases, what they've done is added additional validation to help defend users in case a malicious user had entered bad data trying to abuse the system.
Yep. And then the other handful were just, actually not even a handful, just two other plugins, Micro Focus
Right,
Application and Promoted Builds.
Right, and those there were inside those plugin changes, there were some CSRF, so web vulnerability defenses that were put in, and if I recall correctly, yeah, an XSS. So again, it's just a healthy thing to be sure that you update your plugins and that you update your Jenkins core, especially if you're seeing warnings about security vulnerabilities.
And that's interesting. I have a fresh 277.2 here. And let me go over to Manage Plugins. Now, right now, I have a couple of updates that aren't available to me because I'm running something that, let me rephrase it. The minimum version required for these two plugins is greater than 277. So
Correct.
That's why they're not available to me right now. But if I was to take a look at installed, because this is fresh, everything is nice and clean and joy, joy, happy, happy level. So I don't see any security warnings. But if I did, where would I see those?
So you'd see them on the line where the plugin is. There will be a label there that says security. You would also see an admin monitor warning up in the top right-hand corner telling you that you have plugins that have known issues, known vulnerabilities. So you get two different hints. One is visible to every administrator in that top right-hand corner. And then the other, when you visit this installed plugins page, you'll see a security label that says, oh, this is a plugin that has an issue regarding security.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to the changelog and look at a couple of the other items here. Most of these, though, are all security related, right? I mean, just in general. Or maybe not. Let's see.
Well, yeah, so it depends on your perspective, right? Because the security fixes, there are certainly two of those inside that advisory. Right. The topmost one below security advisory fixes is actually a regression that was introduced in 2.277.1 in the user experience. If I tried to click the help button on the topmost item in a draggable section, it wouldn't click. It's like, that's a relatively bizarre kind of regression. That's not a typical thing. Exactly that icon. If there were any below it, they work just fine. But exactly the topmost icon in that draggable section. And hey, it's good to have it fixed. And it's really impressive that it was detected.
Yep. And then I guess this is just a sub of what we saw up here.
Well, and that's a good one to open up the upgrade guide.
Yeah, let's do that.
Because the upgrade guide will give us a hint as to what's happening there. So one of the things that can be done with web applications is sometimes people will misuse what is intended to be effectively a read-only request, GET, to instead post information and to send that information for action. And what this safeguard does is it says, no, you must use post if you're going to submit things which need action.
Yes, it's and you just sort of said it in your sentence there. People will use GET to do a post.
Exactly, which is well, that's a strange thing. Why would you use GET to do a post? And the answer is because they're making a mistake and because they're human beings.
And that's fine. So this was the big fix for this one, right? And
let's
see.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just trying to figure out, does this allow you to short circuit it?
It does. So one of the intentional safeguards that Jenkins puts in is sometimes users are crucially dependent on a behavior that at its outset is actually insecure.
Right.
And so the Jenkins code commonly will add an escape hatch which allows a user who is intentional about it to say, no, I am going to allow this particular known security weakness because I have to have it in order to get my job done. And so that's what this does. And that's why it recommends doing so is discouraged, right? That phrase really has meaning. And the security team, when they write it, they mean it very seriously.
Yeah.
To open up an escape hatch, if we're talking about most escape hatches, usually you open the escape hatch in case of a disaster, and you hope that you don't drown in the process, right? You hope that it's not a disaster that you open the escape hatch. So be careful using any escape hatch in Jenkins. They're placed there only to help you in case you absolutely have to have it.
And again, if you've not been with us before on one of these What's New, and you've never looked at the upgrade guide, and you're in charge of taking care of the upgrades for your Jenkins controller, we highly recommend always reviewing the upgrade guide, because obviously in 277.1 there was a lot, but if we were to go back prior to, and that one just kept on going. Oh, that's right, because it was 277. Never mind. Can I do this?
Sure,
I've never tried
yeah.
that before. I think I can. It's because I've zoomed in so far. So for every major LTS, there is an upgrade guide. Is there an upgrade guide published for weeklies as well?
There is not.
Okay.
One of the benefits of the LTS process is we do systematically write upgrade guides, and we need the time between LTS releases to assure ourselves that the upgrade guide is reasonable.
Okay.
So it gives us review time. We just don't have the time. We don't have the capacity to do upgrade guides for weekly.
And that makes sense. But going back to what I was saying, always read the upgrade guide. If you're living on LTS and not weeklies, know your upgrade guide. Even, I was trying to remember one, let's see, I think it was, now there was one, like there's always an upgrade guide for an LTS, right? Always.
Right.
Even if it says nothing to worry about.
Correct.
Is that true? Okay.
That is correct, right? We will always have a placeholder, and 2.263.2, I think if you take a look
Was
at that
it?
one.
No,
That was a security fix. So if we looked at, no.
Oh, right here.
So
No, this
yeah,
one.
there it is. No notable changes. There we go.
Yeah. So if it says that and you're reading it, it's like, oh, okay. Nothing known at least.
Right.
And if it became known, guess what? It would be updated.
Correct.
Right? So, okay. So upgrade guides, thumbs up. You want to know and understand your upgrade guide. All right, so since I zoomed in so much because I was wanting to sort of push the discourage, let's see what else we have here. A couple of other just general cleanups here.
Right. And these were serious enough bugs that we justified backporting them from a weekly after 2.277 into 2.277.2. So consider 2.283 may have detected a problem that had existed in 277. And we said, hey, it's been out in weekly now. This change is valuable enough, we'll backport it. And so these are backports, and those backports help users. They help them avoid specific problems.
And you'll notice the size of the dot and the color of the dot. If you've not looked at the legend, it's at the top of the changelog. So we can see that a little red is a bug fix, a big red is a major bug fix, which was the really obscure help button.
Right.
That's, I need to look at that one here. Wait a second. I'm going to open it up because I want to see who reported it and who found it, just because Benny.
Yeah, right.
Benny. Good job, Benny.
And very grateful. It's cool to have a worldwide community contributing. I assume Benny is actually based in China, most likely, or based somewhere in the Far East.
Yeah. Can we actually? No, we can't do that. Okay. And I wouldn't do that to Benny anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a question. I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on screen. And let's see if we can answer that. So the question is, for example, after releasing 2.277.2, new issues will appear. You will fix them in days, months. How to understand which Jenkins release will it be included?
So we usually describe the Jenkins release in the bug report, so that we say it after the release has happened, which Jenkins release fixed it. And so what you'd see on those bug reports was they were fixed in 2.277.2. If you want to track the fix, typically the pull request that tracks the fix is in the bug report as a link, and you can then watch that pull request through. We won't backport without applying an LTS candidate label, and we won't backport typically without a conversation, is this a valuable LTS candidate? So for the most cases, if it's fixed in weekly, you will for sure see it in the next LTS major, so the next 12-week cycle. Sometimes we will backport from weekly into one of the .2, .3, .4, and that is decided with this LTS candidate label. And actually the bug that you see on screen here, Darren's got a great highlight for it. If you look 2 or 3 lines above your highlight, yeah, so that one is fixed in the weekly, 2.272-fixed. If you click that label, it will show you all the bugs that have that label. And there they are. So one of the ways we use inside the issue tracker is we label them to say this was fixed in this release. And if you wanted to see, hey, which things are coming or might be coming, have been suggested, you would use LTS-candidate as the release or as the label instead of using 272 fixed. Yes, there you go. And now candidates, there's in this case a large number of candidates. We won't consider a candidate unless it's already been fixed and already been shipped in a weekly release. And most of these either don't yet have a fix or haven't been delivered in a weekly release. So we watch those to see it needs to be resolved, thus it's been in a weekly release, and we need to then decide, is this valuable enough that we'll backport?
Right, so we'll pick this one just so it's a little more. So starts setup wizard after updating. Starts to setup wizard, which there was Tim, and it's an LTS candidate. And where are we at right now? And nothing's been fixed yet. It's a blocker right now, right? So this one's
Right.
open. So
Exactly. So what you see here, the state says, the status says it's open. So we don't have a fix for it yet. So we can predict it's not arrived in a weekly. Since it's not arrived in a weekly, it won't arrive in an LTS, a .x LTS, until it's been in first a weekly.
is that always true? Does something
No.
always have to be in a weekly?
No, there are urgent cases. For instance, there was a period where we were regularly getting releases of the Jetty web server component.
Right.
And there were occasions where we said we have to have this in LTS even before it arrives in a weekly because of a particularly important fix in that web server component.
Right. So, Mitya, hopefully, number one, I didn't mess up your name too bad. Number two, I hope that answered your question. You can always look at the Jira, which is at issues.jenkins.io. I had to remember that because that changed recently, right? Or did it?
It did. We
Okay.
actually had the Linux Foundation switch to hosting it for us, and instead of jenkins-ci.org, it moved to issues.jenkins.io, and we're very pleased. Special thanks to the Linux Foundation for that transition.
And yes, thank you, Linux Foundation. Number two, one less server to maintain.
That was the secret of the whole deal. We love not having to maintain that server, and they're doing a much better job than we ever did. Yeah, it's great.
Okay. Anything else we need to talk about right here? We
I
good on
think
this?
we covered it.
Okay. So we'll go back to the change log. I think we've already covered everything. Let's go back here and let's talk about what we said we wanted to loop back around to. GSOC is coming up, Google Summer of Code, or GSOD, or GSOD as well, Google Summer of Docs.
Both, and
Okay.
we can actually talk to both. So
Okay.
yeah, so Google Summer of Code, we're at a very strategic point right now. The Google Summer of Code application deadline date is April 13 for students that would like to submit a project proposal to join the Jenkins project. And what happens then is they submit a project proposal, Google sees those project proposals, Google then hands off to the projects that have been approved already. Jenkins is one of those approved projects. We get a period to evaluate the proposals, make our recommendations, and then if I remember right, it's about mid-May, we will start the community bonding phase where the selected students will begin contributing on their project idea. They'll spend about a month in community bonding where they get to know the team members in the community. Their mentors meet with them regularly. They do early changes. And then they spend the next 2 months working on their project, coding, improving, contributing. Last year, for instance, at Google's Summer of Code, we got the GitHub Checks API, which is now used on ci.jenkins.io and all sorts of other places. We got Git plugin performance improvements that is already deployed to 85,000 controllers. So Google Summer of Code is really cool because it allows university students to contribute in a way that can deliver code to tens of thousands of Jenkins controllers.
I'm back. Okay, sorry. You brought up ci.jenkins.io. That's one thing we've never shown before.
We haven't, yeah.
Since we have a few minutes today, this would be an interesting one to take a look at. This is running 277.2. Does CI ever run a weekly, or is it only LTS?
Never. No, well, and I should tell you how many Jenkins servers we run in Jenkins infrastructure, and some of them are running weekly, right?
Yeah.
So we have a series of 4 different Jenkins servers that we use for different purposes. ci.jenkins.io is the publicly visible, readily used. It's run to test all plugins that are using continuous integration, and that instance has thousands of jobs on it that are doing an incredible amount of work. We have it connected to AWS to get compute capacity. We have it connected to Azure to get compute capacity. It's got access to an IBM mainframe. It's got access to an IBM PowerPC machine. It has ARM processors available. This thing is production in every sense of the word, and large scale.
Extremely large scale. So, and I don't have access to it, in case anybody's wondering, so I can't log in or do anything. But it's interesting. If you ever want to understand how Jenkins uses Jenkins, this is one thing you could poke around on. In fact, I'll just click into core here real quick. There's the
Yeah,
acceptance.
okay. Core and Jenkins. There you go. So you can see how Jenkins core is evaluated. The third row down there in the Jenkins job will give you a hint of the kinds of things that happen in Jenkins. And it's an impressive array of branches that we care for. The master branch, certainly, the stable branches, and the current stable that we're working on is stable 2.277. And then all the pull requests are in the pull request tab. And there's a lot going on there. I had just launched a bunch of builds not long before this meeting because we had one particular test that was failing and getting in our way. And so that test has now been fixed, and all sorts of things are being queued up to be ready to be merged.
Okay, let me ask you, was that test actually broken, or was it flaky?
It was actually broken, and
Oh.
it was broken it was broken for a novel reason. It was broken because it was testing some telemetry that we were gathering, and we had intentionally set the telemetry to have an expiration date. The telemetry expiration date had expired, but the test had not been coded to defend itself against the known expiration date of the telemetry gathering. So those kind of things happen.
Even to the people that manage Jenkins.
Right? Definitely to the people who manage Jenkins.
So we talked about GSOC. Let's talk about GSOD.
Okay, so
Docs.
Google's
It's a little different.
Google's season of docs is
season of
different,
docs.
and they use the different name for a reason, right? So Google Summer of Code is focused on university students. It really wants to encourage those who have not yet graduated from the university to come join and help an open source project. Google's season of docs is attempting to address a different challenge. Many open source projects, including Jenkins, have a challenge with documentation. And what Google Season of Docs does is it says, let's invite professional, trained, experienced technical writers to contribute to open source. And we'll give them a small stipend to encourage that contribution. But we'll have them start a project, work through the project, deliver the results of the project, and they use the stipend to justify their work on that project. And we did this last year, and that's how we got Kubernetes on Jenkins, or Jenkins on Kubernetes documentation. We're looking forward to extending that this year, but we don't know that we've been accepted yet. The acceptance announcement will be a few weeks away yet.
Okay. We got a couple more questions here, and then I still want to come around to She Code Africa before we
Great.
at some point before we quit today. I'm going to do these in opposite order, the way they were posted. Do you use the Jenkins file to define your CI jobs? So
We do.
Going back to CI, it's all Jenkins files,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, it's even better than that, all right? Because if you open up ci.jenkins.io and look in the plugins, what you'll find is hundreds and hundreds of plugins that are running their CI jobs there. And almost all of them have a one-line Jenkins file. It says build plugin, find the Git plugin, because that's one that I know and I'm comfortable with.
You're being modest. It's the one you maintain.
Also, yeah. So here, if you look at it, and if you click if you click the replay button down the left, look at the individual job results, Darren. So further down, build number 700 or whatever it is. Yeah, click one of those, and on the left, you may not have permissions. Nope, you don't. Sorry. So you don't get to see it. But if you look at the Jenkins file associated with this, you'll see one line, build plugin.
Yep. Let me see. Let me just pull it up in.
Well, it's actually accessible to you right from that ci.jenkins.io page. There's
Yes,
a
I know.
GitHub link on the left.
Thank
Click
you.
the master branch. Ah, there we go.
It's like,
So now if you look at the Jenkins file here, you'll see, there it is. One-liner, build plugin. Now, okay, what's that doing? That's allowing us to use the experts who know all sorts of cool things about running Jenkins files well to just borrow their skills. Every plugin tends to use this statement, build plugin. I used fail fast false because I want to allow all of the parallel branches that happen in this thing to run even if one of them has a failure.
yep. And the key part here is every plugin follows this, or is supposed to, correct?
Right. That's exactly right.
All right. Gorsky, I'm going to come back to your first question in a moment. Let's go with Jesus here for a second. Declarative or scripted? Boy, you don't want to get into a fight, do you?
Good question. In this case, it's scripted.
It is scripted. And here, why? Here's the context that makes all the difference. Because it is 2021,
Right.
right? It is 2021 today. But when this was created, what year was it?
It was probably 2019, 2018 maybe?
17.
Oh, okay. All right.
This was put into place, if my history serves me, if my brain serves me well, or memory, whatever. Declarative didn't exist at the time this was created.
Well, and there are some things that happen inside this that are not readily expressed in declarative, right? There are some conditional
Correct.
things going on here that would make it harder to maintain if we'd done it in declarative. The
Right.
goal with declarative is easy to maintain. And yes, that's a correct question. Is everything extracted in the shared global library? Yes, it is. There is a shared global library that does the work for build plugin, and I just get it for free.
Yep. And I want to go ahead and say this now. If you're writing new pipelines today, don't start with scripted unless you've been writing it forever. One of the, I can't remember which course did we do. It was either Pipeline Fundamentals, I think it was the Pipeline Fundamentals course, or Pipeline Intermediate. I don't remember. CloudBees has a course for doing Pipeline Intermediate. That was it. In that recommendation, because a lot of these things, declarative came after scripted.
Right.
That's the whole key part of this. So the recommendation for today, April 8th, 2021, is start with declarative.
Correct.
When declarative fails you, then add in a shared library. And the way I defined fail, and it's not really a fail, but if you have to do an inline script block in your declarative, that's fail. That's like doing inline JavaScript or inline CSS if you're thinking web, right? So if you're doing an inline script block, then that's tell you, okay, let's extract that out and drop that into a shared library. But in the case of, okay, that's still not working. Let's say that the matrix part of declarative didn't exist. In fact, I'll give you an example. Within CloudBees, I used to work in services. And I had one client that was dynamically pulling in they were building firmware. And they had a big pool of hard drives. And this wasn't, it was hard drives and other I.O. type devices. They were testing firmware. And it was just a big room of devices. And it wasn't just the CI processes using that. It was other teams using it. So they had written a process that would go out and sweep the thing. It's like, who's available? Okay, give me those things. To do that in declarative, big pain. Scripted, it worked. Now, still busy, but it was at least attainable.
Well, and I think you described it really, really well, that if declarative doesn't meet your need, scripted is there. But my first go-to is still a preference toward declarative because I find it easier to understand. For me, it's easier to use in various tools. I like working with it in Blue Ocean. I like working with it in keeping it simple. It reminds me, keep my pipeline definition simple, put the bulk of my logic into scripts that developers can run on their desktop without having to use Jenkins code itself. So for me, there's a big maintenance burden if I put too much in any form of pipeline. Right? It needs to be down below in things that developers can execute.
I'm going to say it one level further. All I'm trying to do is choreograph commands that would run on command line.
I like that, yeah.
I could say orchestrate, but I chose choreograph a little bit differently because there's some semantic differences there. So
I think the image of choreography is the right image. We're trying to direct other things to do the bulk of the work.
Yeah.
If we're doing the bulk of the work inside the Jenkins file, we're likely making a mistake.
Right. So do you want to take on Igorski's first question?
Help me again. It was, what's coming? Oh yeah. So we've got more UI rework coming. So UI improvements are coming along. We've got additional work going on to help Jenkins become more and more cloud native. We're looking forward to do more documentation about Jenkins in cloud native environments like Kubernetes. Looking forward to them.
That's it? I'm sure there's a lot more, but and a lot of it, so the core is core, right? I mean, Mark focuses on Git plugin and Git client plugin, and you now have a third one that you recently adopted. I won't say the name because
Yes.
number one, I don't remember it, and number two, I think you were the only person in the world using it.
There are some rather obscure plugins that I've adopted, and yes, they happen to meet a need that I have.
Yes, but I don't think anybody else in the world has that same need. So your blast radius is pretty small because you're focusing on Git and Git client.
Right.
We don't know what other people are bringing in.
Right. And there are cool ideas in Google Summer of Code that give you a hint of some of the things that are happening. Right. So one of the proposals is a Tecton client plugin to allow Jenkins to potentially execute Tecton pipelines and show results. Another is a Cloud Events plugin to allow you to receive and send cloud events. Another is extensions to the pipeline to allow it to do authenticated Git operations and without having to do heroic push-ups. All sorts of cool and interesting things that are being proposed as Google Summer of Code projects.
I'm ready for cloud events. I've always been a nerd for events. I'm ready for that one. I wish I could get in on that one, but no, I have to do these videos. Ava actually has a really good question here, and I don't know since I can't log in. Where's the definition of that shared library that's backing build plugin? Is it global?
That's very good. So
it's global with implicit, right?
So what's done to do that is the multi-branch job definition or the organization folder job definition or a folder above either of them can define that a pipeline library should be loaded implicitly. And so that's what's happening there is rather than.
Yeah, I'll pull it up here real quick, and I'll just show it at the global level. And I don't remember what yours was, but if we take a look at, where is it? There it is.
Global pipeline
Add.
libraries, yeah.
I am still getting used to this new tables to divs change. My brain is still there. So if I had a shared library here, and I said main or master or whatever it is, it's this checkbox right here, load implicitly.
Correct.
So I have opinions on this. So my opinion on this is don't ever check that. That's my opinion.
And you and Jesse Glick, I think, are in strong agreement with each other that load implicitly is putting too much control of the configuration of the shared library in the hands of the Jenkins administrator when you really want it in the hands of the consumer of the shared library, right? So you just highlighted, Darren, in this case, by your checking that load implicitly box, you have now forced your consumers that you are going to give them upgrades whether they like it or not.
Correct. Now, that's true, I would say, in 99.9% of the use cases. But in the specific use case for ci.jenkins.io, if it is defined at the global level, it makes total sense. Because that controller does one thing. Well,
Right.
it does more than one thing, but
It has a relatively narrow set of purposes that it must serve. And those purposes, even so, Jesse regularly reminds us, hey, there's a price that we're paying by not requiring that individual plugins must choose which version they're executing.
yep.
And there is. We've made an intentional choice there, and that intentional choice sometimes bothers us. Sometimes it gets in our way. So I think your recommendation, you should always use the library statement to bring in the library at the version you want is the right thing
Yes.
to do.
And you just said that really clearly as well. The version of the library. If
Right.
you are not versioning your libraries and you have a shared library, and I'm not going to get into the details of how a shared library should actually be written. P.S. If there's anything inside the source directory, you did it wrong. That's my opinion. I'll stick with it for now at least. If you're not versioning your library, you are asking for a lot of trouble. Now, not only that, if you're maintaining numerous versions of your library, in other words, if you're not keeping maybe an experimental, a stable, and a stable -1, and you're keeping stable -50 all the way through, you're doing it wrong too. Sorry. As an administrator, you're asking for trouble.
The challenges hiding in those choices become increasingly painful the larger your installation becomes, right? So your recommendations are really good.
Really? Wow. I just made that up. Okay, that's good. Now, so Jesus, I don't believe you are using it wrong. You might be, but I don't believe you are. But now you have knowledge that you didn't have before.
Right.
So now you evaluate. It's like,
And that is, it's know the choices and the risks that you're taking with your various choices, right? If, in my case, I have a library statement that does not give a specific version number because I accept that I want exactly the latest thing. And if it breaks, I will immediately take action. But I am a single consumer of the single library. If I were a single provider to hundreds of consumers, that's a different class of problem, right? And those are the kinds of compromises that it's perfectly reasonable to make your choice which compromise you're going to take.
right. I personally have a Jenkins server that I use to do some podcast post-processing. And I have a shared library that I pulled some stuff out. Not that I would really reuse it, but I have a couple of podcasts that I post-process. And there's a few common steps that I extracted out. Am I versioning that? No. I'm the only consumer.
Right.
Right. If I break it, I fix it and I move on. in even medium-sized companies. You can't always do that, not necessarily safely, especially if you did your shared library incorrectly. I'm not going to go any further. We could talk all day about that,
Right.
and I would get in a lot of trouble, and I don't want to do that today.
Okay.
I'm highly opinionated on that one. Let's get back to, actually, there's one more item from Jesus I do want to pull up. As a thing for GSOC, since Mark, you're deeply involved in that, probably more than GSOC, right? If accepted, you would be more active in GSOC than GSOC.
Correct.
Okay. Pipeline library documentation should be a focus. This has always been one of my jokes that I used in services. The great thing about the great thing about shared library documentation is there's one page. The horrible thing about shared library documentation is there is one page.
So actually, Jesus's comment leads me into we've detected by watching the comments on pipeline step documentation that we've got a serious gap. And part of that, having a serious gap, caused us concern. As it turns out, we also have contributors now from Africa who were interested in, as part of the She Code Africa project, Contributhon in April of 2021, they wanted a project. And what we proposed to them was, hey, let's have these women that are being paid by She Code Africa during the month of April, let's have them contribute to Jenkins by writing pipeline examples, pipeline step documentation, and pipeline argument documentation. And we've started. We're now 1 week into it. We've received our first pull request, and we're thrilled with the results that are coming. What we have right now is 5 women in Africa who were chosen by She Code Africa to be part of this sponsored mentorship. They're being mentored by experts inside the Jenkins project as they developed improvements and submit pull requests to Jenkins plugins to improve the documentation of those Jenkins plugins in the context of pipeline. Now, that's not specific to shared libraries, so I think Jesus's point is still valid. We still have a bunch of work to do on shared libraries. This is more about individual steps that are frequently not documented. The build step is a sort of a classic example where it's got lots of arguments, but the arguments, you don't get much description about what they are. Or clean workspace was one I was just looking at today, where it must have 15 or 20 arguments, and each of them, the sole thing on the argument is the name of the argument and its type. And that doesn't help you if you're trying to decode what is its exact behavior. So we're looking forward to She Code Africa's contributions as we go through the month of April.
That was a great transition. I didn't even have to set it up for you. You just went there. Thank you.
Hey, well, it's a great question because documentation is important, right? Documentation matters, and getting good descriptions needs a programmer's skills. So it's great that these programmers, women in Africa, are willing to come help us.
Yep. Let's try one of Igorski's maybe off-topic questions. Are you willing to go for this? I'm going to read it.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to read it. So for people that are just listening to this and not watching it, they may not see the thing. So now this might be a little bit off topic, but is there a limit of the number of stages that can be run in parallel of a Jenkins file?
And I am confident there must be, because, for instance, we've seen, give you a very specific example, Jesse Glick has had to tune some things in the Jenkins plugin bill of materials CI job because it was running so many jobs in parallel that it was tending to overwhelm ci.jenkins.io. So if you were to use the search field up at the top, Darren, and look for BOM. Now, if I remember right, if you search tools/BOM, so the second one down, and we may have to wait a little, so hit enter now.
Okay, sorry, I didn't do that.
And then in order to visualize what's happening, click the master branch there, and then click, oh, that's interesting.
Oh, okay, well, let's see here. Did the cert go out?
I don't know. That's really novel. Yeah, I don't know why the certificate went aged out. So
I'll go for it.
It is a valid domain.
Yeah.
That's odd. So open blue ocean, yeah, but it's saying that it's not
Yeah, that's fine. Well, it's, hey, we'll deal with it afterwards. It's okay.
exactly. So what this should show us, click the master branch, and let's take a look at what this evaluated. Notice the size of that scroll bar, and this is placing significant demands on what you can do in parallel. But it's working and it's functional, but I am sure there is an upper bound on how much you can do in parallel, because Jesse in the past has had to do some tweaks and tuning on this. He wasn't always able to do this many things in parallel.
Yeah. And I think with what Mitchie said here as well, my machine is acting really slow today. The main question is really how many agents you have online. That's part of it, right? Because there's still an overhead, just like how you would open up a socket on a machine. There are not unlimited sockets. If you've ever run out of open file handles on Linux, you can't open up unlimited files. This, I believe, I don't believe there is a hard limit, but I do believe there is a theoretical limit.
Well, and there certainly the how many agents is one practical limit, and that's one that ci.jenkins.io had to acknowledge. We were unwilling to spend more than a certain amount of money per time on ci.jenkins.io, and therefore we've set upper bounds on how many machines we will allocate to that thing. So one is the practical limit. We're going to say, no, we're not going to allocate you many more machines than that. The other is, just as Darren said, there are certainly internal limits on how many things you can do in parallel. The Blue Ocean interface highlights the usability challenge that's presented by doing that much in parallel, because that much scrolling, when one of those fails, you spend a lot of time trying to find the place on the page where it failed.
Especially if you had a really small 11-inch, 13-inch screen.
Right. There are all sorts of reasons why. Think carefully before you do hundreds or thousands of things in parallel.
Yeah, in fact, let me, because I'm zoomed in right now at 120%, let me go the opposite direction. And let's see. Right. Okay, that's as small as I can go, and I still have to scroll.
Right.
Right. So it's
So
measurable.
You can do a lot of stuff in parallel, but there is a price to be paid for choosing to do too much in parallel.
And literally a price if you're using cloud agents of some flavor.
And you're certainly using power, and you're certainly using compute resources, even if you're hosting them yourself. So there is a price to the choice to do massive parallelism.
Okay. Anything else? If anybody has any other questions, we're here for, if you don't have any questions, we'll call it a day and get ready for the dot. Well, you got something else.
I had one more. I wanted to remind people that you had been really good at highlighting that they need to follow the steps in the upgrade guide. Reminder that 2.277.2 has some very specific descriptions of steps and why you take them. First step, remove unused plugins. Don't keep around plugins that you're not using. Second step, remove deprecated plugins, because third step, when you upgrade to Jenkins 2.277.1 or .2, if you've not removed deprecated and unused plugins, one of them may get in your way. So upgrade to 277.1 or .2, and then update your plugins again so that you've got current versions of plugins. That's not typically required for most other Jenkins LTS versions. 277 is special that way.
Right. Let's go with Eva or Ava. Again, I apologize. I'm going to go for it. With .1, it isn't possible anymore to add users with a password defined in XML on startup by copying it into config. Is there a migration guide?
There's not a migration guide for that one. That change actually, I think, came in quite a while ago. It's that it will automatically transition you from username to username and some license plate. It's a good question. Ava, if you've got further questions there, you may want to raise an issue on issues.jenkins.io and we can talk further. I know that I'm using exactly that configuration to maintain my Jenkins setup with a Docker file. and it's working for me. So there may be something else in your environment that is causing a surprise there. So good use of issues.jenkins.io to raise an issue and let us help you look at it.
Yep. Okay. So we will be back again in, is it April already? We'll be back in May. Where's this year gone?
4 weeks.
We'll be back in 4 weeks. And Mitchie brought up an interesting point. Maybe when she did the upgrade, it could have been from super old. Because you said...
And so we did have one bug report that was especially interesting because they had an administrator password that was stored in an XML file that was old enough that it was not using the current encryption form. And what that means is we think it may have been 5 or 6 years that they'd had that same administrator password. And in that case, yeah, that one may be an issue. So if you have a Jenkins system that started 8 or 10 years ago, you may need to change your administrator password before you do the upgrade to 277.
That would be obscure. But
That one
it's always
was
possible.
obscure.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't duplicate the problem, and I went back 3 or 4 years old Jenkins and still couldn't duplicate the problem. So that one was interestingly obscure. And part of the fun of reviewing bug reports is some of them really are interestingly obscure.
Okay. So we covered everything. We'll be back in 4. Is it really going to be 4 weeks or is it 5 weeks this time? For dot 3.
I have to look at the calendar. Okay. Sorry, I don't remember.
The date's already been picked for the dot 3.
It has.
When's the vote for the next LTS happening?
2 weeks. So the choice of LTS baseline will happen in 2 weeks.
Okay. So if people want to follow that, which mailing list do they need to follow?
Jenkins Developers is the place where that decision will be made. Okay. And the discussions will probably start in 7 to 10 days.
Okay. And if you're not aware of the mailing list, you can go out to Jenkins.io. Gavin changed all the places, and I don't know where anything is anymore. Gavin, if you're watching this, I'm going to just whine about it a little bit. Where are we? Community, and then mailing lists.
Right.
And then here you can just click into, here's the secret, people. Click on the archive link. The archive link is your friend, because then, let's just go to the dev one real quick. It just, oh yeah, now it's wanting to, I'm not going to log in right now. But anyway, then you can just get it in the UI, unless you've got a cool offline newsreader. So.
Right. And the archive lets us keep everything public, everything visible to everybody. It makes things very open in discussions and worries and concerns. So it's very healthy.
Yep. And my studio actually got messed up, so I don't have all my cool stuff. So let me just, if you want to follow Mark on Twitter and give him a hard time, there's Mark's Twitter handle.
There you go.
Thanks, Mark, for being with us today. And again, we both work for CloudBees, and you're watching this right now on CloudBees TV. So if you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment, go ahead and click on that subscribe button, ring the bell. I've been putting out usually 2 videos a week, a lot recently, just right around Jenkins. There will be some CloudBees stuff there, yes. Okay, come on, we work for CloudBees, so things will happen that way too, but that's fine. And before you leave, if you're still here with us, go and give us a thumbs up on this video. Why? I don't know, it's a YouTube thing. Just give us a thumbs up. It'd be nice. And let's see, what else? I believe that's it. So let's call it a day. We'll be back in 4 to 5 weeks. We don't know when the next LTS comes out. We'll know soon enough, though. So, all right, everybody, thanks for hanging out with us today. We will see you probably in about a month. And we'll talk more about...
Darren.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And we'll see everybody later. Now I have to find the close, which is right now.